Hi class, welcome to lesson number 8. This is a continuing coursework on AP Micro and Macroeconomics. Currently we're going over microeconomics concepts, and after we're done with that, we go over to macroeconomics. Over the last class, we talked about the difference between law and supply and law and demand. We talked about how that creates a negative demand sloping line or a positive sloping supply line, and we just talked about differences in there. So the homework question last time I gave you was, what is the law of supply and what's the law of demand? And then how does that, either of the laws, how does that create a negatively sloped demand schedule? So the law of demand is that basically states that as the price rises, the consumer, right, you and I are consumers, right, we consume less as the price goes up. That's the law of demand. A law of supply is kind of like the opposite. If you and I were suppliers and the price was going up, the quantity supplied would actually increase, right? And what creates a negatively sloped demand schedule is actually the law of demand. Because when we state that, I'm going to go to the graph here. When we state that remember guys, this is the price, right? And this is the quantity. When we state that as the price goes up, right, the consumer is going to consume less. So if I start off from here, right, at this price point, and at this quantity consumed, or demanded, excuse me, if I increase the price, right, from say here to here, the quantity demanded goes down, right? And this is what creates the negative demand line. So the answer is that the law of demand is the reason why the demand graph is actually negatively sloped. Okay? I hope that's very clear to you guys. So today we're going to go over the difference between amount supplied and supplied, excuse me. I'm going to say that one more time. So today we're going to go over the differences between supply and the amount supplied. So let's start off with the definition of what is amount supplied, okay? So the amount supplied, right? Amount supplied is as follows. The amount, I'm going to underline this real quick, is the amount that suppliers are willing to supply or to provide, right? Same word, supply or provide. I'm going to say provide of a particular good at a particular price point, at varying prices of that good. At varying prices, at a varying price of that good. And what does that mean? What does that really mean? Well, if I take a graph, right, and we've become expert at this point, right? Take a price and quantity graph, and we draw a supply, right, which is positively sloped. What this basically says is that at every single price point, right, at every single price point, the amount that the supplier is willing to supply at is going to be different. Why? Because let's go back to that law of supply we talked about. As the price increases, right, we said that the supplier is willing to supply more. Why is that? Because there are two things that happen. We went over this the last time. We said that at one point, as the price increases, that covers the marginal costs to provide more stuff, right? At the same time, your profits go up. So that's why the supplier is willing to provide more at higher prices. So the amount supplied is just this point, right? The amount, this is the quantity supplied at one point, the quantity supplied at another, right? So the amount supplied is just if this is one good, it's the amount that the supplier is willing to provide at a particular price point. And this is, let's say P, and this is P1, okay? So that is amount supplied. And it's really important because in questions in the AP test, they try to confuse you with amount supplied versus the supply itself. And the way we differentiated amount demanded with demand is the same way we're going to differentiate amount supplied and supply, right? Amount supplied relates to one particular point. The supply relates to the whole graph that we're talking about. And with that being said, the next point we're going to cover is how a supply line shifts. And there's a couple of reasons why a supply line would shift. And we're going to go over all of them and why this causes a particular shift in all of these areas, right? So let's go over the reasons that a supply would shift, okay? So reasons for right, supply shifts, okay? And there are a couple of reasons. Let's start off with number one. Okay, what's number one? Number one is the cost of inputs. Okay, costs of inputs. What does that mean? All right, so let's pick an example of a good. Okay, let's say that I'm going to choose these markers. Okay, so what goes into this marker? Okay, there's a couple inputs, right? There's a plastic that this is made out of, right? There's the ink that goes into this, right? All of these are just inputs to making this particular marker, correct? So say, for example, for some reason, the cost of plastic, which is one of the inputs to go in here, goes up, right? So say that for some reason, the cost of input actually goes up. What happens is, as a supplier who makes, if I manufacture these markers, and the cost of plastic, which is an input, is going up, what's going to happen is the cost of producing this marker is going to go up entirely, right? So at the same amount of, say I'm producing X amount of markers, I have to pay more to produce the same, right? So my profits are shrinking. So if my cost of inputs go up, right? My example was if my cost of plastic to make this goes up, I'm going to decrease the supply of pens because I can't produce as many, right? So if the cost of inputs go up, right? Your supply, right? Supply shifts left, right? Or decreases. Okay, so if my cost of inputs go up, what's going to happen is the supply, right, is going to shift up or is going to decrease. Same thing, okay? So I'm going to show these two arrows, show a new supply line. And remember, guys, if it's a demand shift or a supply shift, it always has to be parallel to the line, okay? Never, perpendicular, any other way. It always has to be parallel, okay? Excuse me. So with the new supply, right, and say for some reason, I'm going to draw demand, okay? So the demand hasn't changed at all. So if this was your previous equilibrium, right, let's say this was previous equilibrium, right? This is my price, let's say 2 and Q2. P2 and Q2 were previous equilibrium. I can write that for you guys, right? Previous equilibrium. EQ stands for equilibrium, okay? The previous equilibrium, say, was at Q2, P2, right? Q2, P2. Now, my new equilibrium, right? New equilibrium, okay, is going to be at, if you go over to this graph, if you go over to the new supply line and the old demand graph, right? And you see where they intersect, right? Right, QE and PE. I hope everyone sees this. Okay, this is the point, right? If you see my new equilibrium, right, my QE and my PE, what happens is, I'm going to write QE, PE. What happens is that my price has gone up. If I shift my supply line to the left because my cost of input has gone up, what's happened is that my prices have risen, right? And the quantity supplied has gone to the left, right? Now, or my quantity equilibrium has gone to the left. Why is that? It's become more expensive to produce the same good, so the supplier is not going to produce as many, right? So he's going to decrease the supply by shifting the supply line to the left, right? So his prices go up, right? And he can cover the cost of inputs, the marginal cost, he can cover those, and the amount that his quantity goes down, okay? Prices go up, quantity goes down. So that's number one, cost of inputs. Now, similarly, the other opposite of cost of inputs is, say for some reason, cost of inputs decrease, right? my supply will shift to the right, okay? And I can draw that out for you. Maybe in the next example, we'll go over what happens when a supply shifts to the right. But if my cost of inputs decrease, my supply shifts to the right because I can produce more because my marginal cost is lower. So in that case, my quantity would actually increase and my price would decrease. But for this reason, I'll just show you how it went up. Okay, so let's move on to number 2. So what is number 2? All right. There are a couple here we're going to talk about, but 2 in this case would be technology. Okay, technology. And why is technology really important? Technology kind of relates to the cost of inputs. Okay, in an advanced world like this, and we constantly have new advances, right? The way you're able to see me today is phenomenal, okay? Because at one point in time, no one around the world could see each other, where this was recorded and whatnot. So technology is being improved every day, correct? So if, the reason why technology is important is if I'm able to produce this marker, right? Our example was I'm producing these markers. And for some reason that I have a brand new technology, right? My machines in my factory can produce 2 times what they're producing, okay, for the same cost. So that is phenomenal because for the same cost that I put in, technology is allowing me to produce more of these, right? So technology is kind of like when technology goes up, right? And generally speaking, it goes up. It can also go down. But if it goes up, right? If you think about it, sort of like your cost of inputs go down, okay? And if you can't relate that, don't worry about it. But understand that if my technology goes up, right, for the same amount of cost, right, I can produce more, okay? And there's a reason, if my technology goes up, what's going to happen is my supply, right, will shift to the right, shift to the right, okay? And why is that? And I'm going to show you on the graph, okay? Take this old supply line, right? And I'm going to shift it to the right. And then always show arrows so you know where I'm going, right? And draw this new supply line that's to the right. And I'll call it S2, okay? And if you notice from the previous, equilibrium of, the original supply and demand line, if it was at Q2, P2, what's going to happen is let's call it Q3 and let's call it P3. Okay, P3 somewhere over here. What happens when I shift my supply to the right is that my price actually goes down, okay? And my quantity goes to the right, okay? So when my supply shifts right, because my technology went up, what's happening is I can produce more, any good, right? It could be laptops, it could be markers, right? You produce more for the same cost. So what happens is your supply shifts to the right, okay? And when it shifts to the right, I can produce more, right? My quantity goes to the right, and my price actually goes down, right? So consumers are able to, consume more for the same, and there's more quantity, right? So technology, what it does is that it decreases the costs, and you can talk about marginal costs, okay? And it's the same like if your cost of inputs go down. Same thing. Cost inputs go down, supply shifts right. Technology goes up, supply shifts right. Technology goes down, then it's kind of like cost of inputs going up, supply shifts to the left. All right? So let's move on to number 3. Okay? So number 3 is actually taxes. Okay? So let's talk about taxes. We always like it when people take our money. I'm kidding. Taxes are important because taxes sort of act like costs, right? So if a government if a government starts to tax more, it's kind of like your costs of making that good go up, right? So say I'm in a country. Let's choose a random country, okay? Let's choose I'm in Ireland, okay? In Ireland, I make these markers, okay? And in these markers, the government of Ireland decides that, for some reason their costs of whatever healthcare are going up, right? They decide that they need to increase the taxes, okay? And what they do is, if they increase the taxes, as a supplier who makes these markers, I have to pay more, okay? So in our example, taxes go up, okay? What that really means is that your costs are going up because taxes can be added to this. The cost of making this pen or marker goes up for me as a producer, okay? So can you guess what happens if taxes go up? Okay, I'll give you a hint. It's kind of like when your cost of inputs go up. You're right. The supply shifts to the left, okay? So same thing here, right? Supply shifts left, okay? So if my taxes go up, what's going to happen is if I have my original supply line, it's going to shift left. So can you imagine what happens? Prices go up, right? And my quantity goes to the left, all right? So taxes are kind of like cost of inputs as well. So, I want you all to kind of relate to these things because it's important. You can get a more understanding that way. If you understand them separately, that's okay, but it's really important to kind of understand economics as this whole kind of unifying concept rather than separate individual concepts, okay? So if taxes go up, it's kind of like your cost of inputs going up, okay? But if you don't understand that, that's fine. Just know that if your taxes go up, your supply shifts to the left because it's more expensive to make something, okay? So let's move on to number 4, all right? What is number 4? Number 4 is price expectations, okay? Price expectations. Okay, price expectations. So we talked about price expectations from a consumer point when we talked about demand, right? So we said that for some reason, that was about demand, but let's talk about supply. So in a supply, let's say for some reason, I expect the prices of these markers, right? We've chosen our example to be markers. Say our markers in the future, I expect as a supplier the prices to go up, okay? What do you think I'll do as a supplier, right? So if I know in the future, okay, that I think I'll make more money, you think I'll produce more now? I won't, right? Because what's going to happen is the more I produce in the future when the prices are up, the more profits I make, right? So in the present, if I know right now that my price expectations in the future, my price is going to go up, what I'll do as a supplier who makes these markers is I'll shift the supply to the left temporarily, and when those prices go up, then I'll shift to the right. And whenever we talk about supply shifts, understand this is very important. We talk about present tense, okay? So even if I know my price expectations in the future are going up, okay, what I'm going to do currently is scale back, right? Shift my supply to the left so that in the future when the prices go up, then I can supply more and my supply will go to the right. So price expectations go up, then I shift it to the left, okay? So if my price expectations go up, it's kind of like the same thing, okay? Supply, right? Supply shifts left, okay? Supply shifts left. So if my price expectations in the future go up, I'm going to shift to the left. Why? Because I know that when prices actually go up, I can increase the supply and make more money, right? But for now, when the prices are low, I'm not going to produce more because, I don't make more profits. I make more profits when the prices go up. Similarly, if my price expectations in the future, I think prices are going to go down, what I'm going to do as a supplier is I'm going to start to increase my supply in the present because I know my profits will be high now, and when the prices go down, I'll shift my supply to the left, right? So price expectations are a little tricky. Understand that in the future, if prices go up, supply shifts left. Price expectations in the future go down, my supply shifts to the right, okay? And it's tied around that concept of profits. So in economics, the moral of the lesson is to think like a consumer or think like a supplier because they're two very different concepts. And it's very important to think that way. As a supplier, you're worried about profits, right? As a consumer, you're worried about prices and you're worried about if what's the least I can pay for the same good that I can get, all right? And in the future, we'll talk about a concept of utility, which makes more sense as a consumer. But here is there are 2 more things that are left. Number 5, we're gonna create more space here. I'm gonna erase the board to my right so that we can create more space. We have 2 more things left. There's 5 and 6 that I will talk about. So this is continuing the reasons for supply shift. Reason for supply shift number 5, okay, is the fact of price of other outputs. Okay. Price of other outputs slash substitute goods. Okay, so what is this? Okay, so in our example we talked about markers. Okay, so say as a guy who can make markers. Okay, you know, for some reason I can also make, let's say I can make I don't know, I can make pens. Okay, so your regular pens that you write on paper, or pencils. Let's say pencils. Okay, they're just easier. So say I can make pencils and these markers, right? So say for some reason the ability for me to make the profits of pencils go up, right? You think I'll make more markers or pencils? I'll make more pencils, right? So remember, guys, I told you this before. As a producer, you always are worried about profits, okay? So, let me give you a more kind of, because we talked about substitute goods, it's more important to talk about really important substitute goods. So let's see. So a really cool way of thinking it is, say I have two things, a whiteboard and a blackboard, okay? And me as a maker, I make both. I make both whiteboards and blackboards, okay? So, these days, people like to use whiteboards, right? This is a whiteboard. The other kind is a blackboard, which you use chalk with. So say that for some reason the market for whiteboards is going up. If I can make both whiteboards and blackboards, what's going to happen is that I'm going to start making more whiteboards, right? Because if people want more whiteboards, the profits are going to be higher in whiteboards, right? So I'm going to start cutting down the way you make blackboards, okay? So, this is a more kind of complex idea of price of other inputs, outputs. So it's okay if it takes more time to understand this. But the basic concept is, as a producer, right, wherever your profits are, you should think about that, right? So if my whiteboards market is better, I'm going to produce more whiteboards. If the blackboards market is better, I'll use more blackboards. So the moral of the story is, say the price of outputs, let's say the substitute goods, right? So say that pretend like this graph here talks about the blackboard market, okay? The blackboard market. And let's say that the price of whiteboards, okay? So in this example, right, I'm gonna write this down. Example, price of whiteboards, right? W boards is whiteboards, okay? Whiteboards goes up, okay? If my price of whiteboards goes up, that means there are more profits in whiteboards, okay? There's more profits in whiteboards. So if this talked about blackboards, what's going to happen to the supply is it's actually going to shift left, okay? So if my price of whiteboards go up, my supply of blackboards decreases, okay? It's a downward sloping arrow, okay? Because if my price of a substitute good go up, there's more profits in that substitute good, right? So if I'm producing the other good, I'm going to cut down the supply because there's less profits in that, okay? Does that make sense to everybody? I hope it does. So if my price of substitutes go up, okay, the substitute goods go up, the good that you're talking about, right, the supply is going to shift to the left. If my price of substitute goods go down, then I'm going to shift to the right because there's more profits in my area. Does that make sense? And if it takes more time to understand that, that's fine. Just think about it from a perspective of profits. It's going to help you out a lot. All right. Last one we're going to talk about is the number of suppliers. And this is a very easy concept to understand. I hope everyone can see this. It's the number of suppliers, okay? Suppliers. Okay? And it's pretty straightforward, okay? So say for some reason that the number of suppliers go up, okay? So the example that we talked about in the previous examples for all of these is that I make these markers, okay? And in these markers, the number of people that make these markers suddenly increases, okay? So there's 5 factories in, let's say, the world that make these markers. All of a sudden, now there are 10 factories making these markers. What do you think is going to happen to the supply? It's going to shift to the right? Does that make sense? Because if my supply goes up, okay, there's more number of suppliers, okay, number of suppliers goes up, my supply will go up, right? My supply goes up. And what does it mean when supply goes up? it shifts to the right, okay? Shifts right. Shifts right, okay? And that's pretty straightforward, you know, it's gonna shift from here to here, right? So suppliers go up, supply goes up. So supply shifts to the right. Suppliers go down, supply goes down, supply graph shifts to the left, okay? I hope that's pretty straightforward. So there's 6 main reasons that your supply graph will shift, okay? Understanding these is extremely important because I guarantee there'll be some test questions trying to understand why certain things happen. My final thing, the way I'm going to wrap this up, is showing you a little graph or a chart on what's going to happen on all these things that, you know, if you shift to the demand or you shift to the supply, how that affects the price and quantity, okay? So this last part is just going to be a simple summary on what happens when all these shifts happen, because it's not as simple as straightforward as just one particular shift. What really is going to happen is there might be a demand shift and a supply shift, and then you have to understand what happens, right, to price and quantity. And it's not as easy as you think it is, but after this graph, hopefully it'll become easier, okay? So the way we're going to section this off is into 4 particular areas, right? So the first one is going to be the change, okay, in demand. Demand, okay? Okay? The next is going to be the change in supply. Okay? Next is going to be how this affects the equilibrium, right? EQ stands for equilibrium, price. Okay? And the next, sorry if this is not a straight line. I'm going to fix this real quick, okay? And this is going to be equilibrium. I hope you guys can guess. It's quantity, okay? Quantity. All right. So say for some reason that my change in demand is going to go up, okay? So demand shifts to the right, okay? And nothing happens to the supply, all right? What do you think is going to happen to the price? It's going to go up, right? And the quantity is going to go up, all right? Now, let's say the change in demand goes down, my quantity stays the same, okay? Stays the same. It's the exact opposite, right? My price goes down, my quantity goes up, okay? So all of these shifts, understand that you have to do it on a graph to understand it more clearly, but this is how it goes, okay? So let's keep the demand and supply constant, or demand constant, the next one. Let's say that my supply increases, right? What happens to my price? My supply increases, price goes down, okay? What happens to the quantity? The quantity goes up, okay? Supply goes down, right? My price goes up and my quantity goes down. Now, here is the trickier part, is both the shifts, right? Let's say for some reason my demand goes up, okay? And my supply goes up. What happens to the price? Here's the tricky part. You don't know. It just depends. Later on, we can probably go on more concepts. For now, price is not determinable. But my quantity goes up, okay? So if my demand goes up, my supply goes up, price you don't know, quantity goes up. The other opposite is, say for some reason my price goes down, my supply goes down, right? You don't know what happens to the price again, right? If there's a double shift, you don't know what happens to the price, but my quantity actually goes down, okay? So this is the chart for the different shifts in demand and supply, right? I hope this is clear to all of you. With that, being said, we're going to go over the homework question so that in the next lesson you guys can catch up and I can give you the answer for that in the next one. Okay? So this one is going to be pretty simple and straightforward. Name me the 6 reasons why the supply will shift. Okay? 6 reasons why supply will shift. And I'm talking about the graph. All right? So come back next lesson. I hope to see you all next one. And take care and see you in lesson 9.